ground running with coronavirus restrictions in an attempt to stem a fast-growing outbreak.
Time is now of the essence and we must act swiftly and decisively. We cannot wait to see how bad this gets.
But some states and territories aren't taking any chances and have already locked South Australians out. The government settles a class action lawsuit over robo-debt out of court for $1 billion.
And coming up on The Business, double standards. ANZ boss Shayne Elliott on regulating buy now, pay later, but supporting the scrapping of responsible lending laws.
Hello, welcome to ABC News. I'm Karina Carvalho. South Australia is on the brink of a second coronavirus wave with a cluster of local cases linked to a quarantine hotel outbreak. 17 people from Adelaide's northern suburbs have tested positive for COVID-19, including 15 from one family. Authorities are now in a race against time to track down and isolate anyone who might have come into contact with them. And that's led to a return of tougher restrictions for a state which was preparing to further ease controls this week.
As news of the COVID cluster spread, so too did the numbers getting tested.
The amount of people here, it's going to shut down the northern suburbs.
Affected shops and businesses have closed, as well as 2 schools with active cases.
He had been crook all week. He just coughing, didn't sound the best. And then Saturday he went and got tested.
The biggest test is for health authorities to stop the cluster spreading even further.
It looks like we're in the beginning or early part of what could be a second wave, but we have time to get on top of it.
Like Melbourne, authorities believe the cluster started at a Medi hotel in the CBD, where 2 security guards and a worker, understood to be a cleaner, tested positive. The other 14 cases are relatives, including an 80-year-old woman, 2 nurses at an aged care facility, as well as a prison worker. 3 children are also being treated as active cases.
No one wants another outbreak like in Victoria, and we have to take all steps possible to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I think that's what the authorities are doing here.
Some of those steps include new restrictions. All international flights are being suspended, gyms will close, and gathering limits cut in public and private venues.
This is a wake-up call for us that COVID-19 has not gone away. As much as we might feel frustrated by these ongoing restrictions, they are there for a reason.
It's also a wake-up call for managing hotel quarantine rules. South Australia is now enforcing mandatory weekly testing for all workers in the Medi hotel system.
We are going to get the very occasional escape as the one we're seeing here in South Australia, which is why we need a really robust second line of defence, and that's our contact tracing system.
The system in South Australia is strong. We are standing up the National Incident Centre contact tracing capability to assist South Australia. We have offered them the ADF, and if more is required, more will be provided.
Support also from Victoria.
I would be confident that South Australia will get on top of this, and if there's anything we can do, large or small, then of course we stand ready to do that.
Hundreds of people are in quarantine across Adelaide, including 96 police officers. And with thousands lining up for a swab today, it's inevitable more cases will be found. Richard Davies, ABC News, Adelaide.
South Australia's new restrictions will likely remain in place for 2 weeks, but will be reviewed before then and could be relaxed sooner. The Premier Stephen Marshall says SA Health is responding strongly and quickly in order to get on top of the cluster. But questions are already being asked about how the state's hotel quarantine system and exactly how the virus was able to escape and get into the community.
Sweeping restrictions reintroduced across the state in a desperate attempt to stop the spread.
We are now facing our biggest test to date, but we can and we must rise to this new challenge.
That challenge sparking new directions from midnight tonight.
The next 24 hours will be critical.
For the next 2 weeks, restaurants, pubs and cafes will have their numbers capped at 100, but other businesses will have to shut down.
Gyms, recreation centres, trampoline and play cafes, these will close.
Outdoor boot camps will still be allowed. Numbers in cinemas will drop to 1 person per 4 square metres. Masks will be mandatory for personal care workers like beauty therapists and hairdressers. Funerals will be capped at 50 people, as will private gatherings in licensed venues. 150 guests can still attend weddings, but they will need to register their details with SA Health. As for home gatherings,
private residents are capped now at 10 persons per residence, and all activities with an approved COVID management plan scheduled for the next 2 weeks have been cancelled.
Masks will be used in aged care homes with visitor restrictions and multi-site work restrictions reintroduced. All South Australians are being asked to work from home if possible, and the vulnerable are advised to stay home altogether.
We're also advising against any unnecessary travel at the moment, and we're also advising to wear a mask where it's not possible to physically distance, for example, on public transport.
That includes country areas. Police say they've been focusing on education until now.
But if people do the wrong thing and they do so knowingly, then they should expect that there be a sanction.
As a result of the outbreak, weekly tests for all Medi hotel workers.
I have brought in the mandatory testing for all staff, regardless of whether they're employed by the hotel, by SAPOL or by Health.
While stressing the government runs Medi hotels, even though the security guards are hired privately.
The oversight is by SA Health and SAPOL, and so we have police presence at all times and nursing presence at all times.
The Premier pushing a positive message.
I absolutely guarantee that we will get through this.
A tough sell in a week where restrictions were expected to ease. Stacey Lee, ABC News, Adelaide.
Epidemiologist and World Health Organisation advisor Professor Mary Louise McLaws says another outbreak linked to hotel quarantine was inevitable.
Quarantine hotels were a good interim idea. However, they are not purpose-built, and while they have South Australian police assisting, there needs to be, in the meantime, until they get a purpose-built quarantine station or use, say, for example, Howard Springs, they need an infection control expert embedded 24/7, not just to do audits. This virus is elusive and clever and sneaky, and we've seen over 2,500 healthcare workers in Victoria get infected and over 12,000 in Asia Pacific. So it's not surprising that staff who are hospitality staff or security staff are becoming infected.
The comparison has, of course, already been made with Melbourne, but these two situations are somewhat different, aren't they?
I believe that from my analysis in Victoria, they had quite a high embedded community infection, and that this went undetected for a while. But in Victoria, of course, having very little to zero infections, they witnessed it very early. But one of the problems is that people in quarantine hotels and people that work with them, in this particular instance, are hyper-connected with a large family. That's a good thing because the contact tracers can potentially find all contacts of the people that have worked in that area. But they've also got people working really essential services such as correction facilities and residential aged care facilities, which begs the question, you can't stop people and their relatives from working in these essential services. We need them. But we do need to keep those that work in quarantine hotels away from built-up environments where they can inadvertently spread it. We need to introduce rapid point-of-care tests before they leave each night.
I wanted to ask about that because one of your colleagues, Professor Catherine Bennett, has suggested a daily saliva test, that could be a way rather than actually having to go through the full test as a way of being able to test staff on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. So there are 2 rapid point-of-care tests that have received TGA approval, but with the caveat that they should be used for research only. But now is the time to actually put them in place. One of them, I believe, uses a swab, and it only takes 13 minutes to get a result. I believe the one that Professor Bennett is talking about is from the Doherty. The other ones I'm thinking about have a very small proportion of missed cases.
How much more robust is South Australia's contact tracing system than Melbourne's was at the time of its second wave?
Well, I don't know the contact tracing system per se in South Australia, but what I can immediately suggest is that they're already in front of the gun, so to speak, because they've had very few cases. The cases they've had have been imported cases, which means that their contact tracers are ready to go, and they can be at every one of those 17 cases, homes, on the telephone, talking through to them. And now is the time, given that they've got very few cases so far, to actually do the contacts of the contacts, to go even deeper, because they have the human resources and pathology resources to do the contacts of the contacts, because if I'm correct, this particular family is well connected with each other, and they then have friends of friends, and particularly where they work. So now is the time to go further and do that second level of contacts to ensure it doesn't escape.
An embarrassing government computer blunder has ended in $1 billion payout to hundreds of thousands of Australians. Just minutes before the Robodebt debacle was to go to trial, the Commonwealth struck a 7-figure settlement. From Canberra, here's political reporter Matthew Doran.
Computers. With artificial intelligence, they're meant to make life easier and cut costs. But for the government, they've done the exact opposite.
This is a day where legal records have tumbled.
The Commonwealth is coughing up hundreds of millions to dodge a class action trial, which would have poured over the messy details of a program even the government conceded was illegal.
The only reason why the Morrison government surrendered was they had the hot breath of the court on their throat.
The government had already agreed to repay $721 million in debts wrongly clawed back, and today it's agreed to wipe another $398 million it was still chasing. On top of that, $112 million in compensation for those left distressed and distraught by the scheme.
Never enough money, but it's the best that can be achieved in all the circumstances of this case.
I was told that it was based on algorithms that would be too difficult for me to understand.
For the lead plaintiff in the case, pursued for $3,000, today's victory is a relief.
I'm glad that it's come to closure, and I'm very happy with the result.
An apology not part of the deal.
Well, I already made remarks on that in the Parliament earlier this year.
I think he demonstrated that he understood the gravity of the situation.
The Commonwealth has not accepted or admitted any liability in the matter.
The road to reparation has been long and bumpy. The Coalition was spruiking its welfare crackdown on the eve of the 2016 election.
We ensure the system does not have the leakage.
And dismissed the class action 3 years later.
It's just a political stunt.
Before an embarrassing about-face 6 months ago.
We'll be refunding $721 million.
Despite this saga ending in a $1 billion settlement, the government's insisting that its surrender shouldn't be interpreted as an admission of liability. But in the court of public opinion, where governments face much harsher judgments, the legacy of Robodebt will live on in the heartache and anguish it caused hundreds of thousands of Australians. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Canberra.
The most comprehensive attempt to quantify the financial cost of mental illness and suicide in Australia has come back with an astounding tally, almost $250 billion a year. But the government's key economic advisor has found the Commonwealth could save as much as $20 billion annually if it overhauls the system to stop people falling through the cracks. Political reporter Stephanie Dalzell has the story.
Devika Krishnan was just 14 when she began experiencing depression and anxiety, but she went undiagnosed for years.
The biggest barrier for me was just not knowing who or where to go to.
3/4 of people with mental illness first experience symptoms before they turn 25. Acknowledging that, a government-ordered report lists emotional development of school children a priority, recommending all schools employ a wellbeing coach.
That definitely will encourage more young people to reach out.
In 2018, the Productivity Commission was asked to assess the economic cost of mental health. Its final report documents long-standing problems in the sector, underinvestment in prevention and difficulty accessing support, while finding the financial cost of mental health is up to $220 billion a year.
These costs are borne by those people with poor mental health and the people who care for them.
The report also recommends better follow-up care after suicide attempts and greater support for workers with mental illness. But it doesn't examine the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on a system already under severe stress.
The challenges now are large. What we need to see is really the size and scope of the government response.
Dozens of reports on mental health have been handed to government over the years, but those in the sector are hoping this one brings long-lasting change because it goes beyond the health sector into workplaces and schools. The government's had the draft findings for a year and the final report for 5 months, but despite acknowledging the urgent need for change, it won't be responding until May's budget, 5 months away.
It's an epidemic needing urgent attention.
When the government responds, the report estimates its changes could save up to $20 billion a year, and most importantly, many lives. Stephanie Dalzell, ABC News, Canberra.
The impact of the last bushfire season on many emergency service workers and their families was brutal. Now they'll be offered premium mental health support free of charge.
Long after these fires razed the land, the memories of them continued to simmer.
It took quite a mental toll on nearly all of our people. Everyone's been affected in a different way.
Cam Baker's been fighting fires for decades, but the last season took its toll, leading him to reach out for help.
We were all faced with making decisions that affected people on the ground, asking firefighters to go and protect people and potentially be in harm's way. And that certainly plays a lot on the mind.
It is hoped a new program will make it easier for first responders to ask for help.
The fact that they are happy to put themselves in harm's way to protect other people means that they're less likely to ask for help than other people.
The federally funded program is available to all emergency workers who assisted in the bushfire effort. They'll be offered tailored treatment plans, up to 12 free one-on-one therapy sessions and a confidential online assessment.
They witnessed members of their community lose their homes and even worse. And then there's obviously firefighters that lost their own colleagues. So there's been some significant impact on mental health for firefighters in this last season.
It will be delivered through the Black Dog Institute and the University of New South Wales PTSD, anxiety and stress clinics.
We've got to make sure they're fit and functional to be able to do that job this summer and next summer and the summer after.
Staying mentally fit to protect our communities. Kathleen Ferguson, ABC News, Sydney.
And if you need information or support, you can contact Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36 or Lifeline on 13 11 14. Time to check in with what's coming up on The Business. Here's host Elise Morgan.
Tonight, double standards. ANZ boss Shane Elliott on regulating the buy now, pay later space, but supporting the scrapping of responsible lending laws. Our exclusive interview. And bargain buy, the all-American icon falls flat in the Asia Pacific. Can new owners unlock Coke's value? All this and more, 8:45 Eastern Daylight Time.
Melbourne will eventually be home to a new high-tech vaccine manufacturing plant as part of a $1 billion deal to secure the nation's supply of health products. The Prime Minister and the Health Minister visited the site of the plant complex today after pledging $1 billion towards the project. Pharmaceutical company CSL plans to manufacture vaccines and anti-venom at the Tullamarine site until at least 2036. The facility will be the largest of its kind in the Southern Hemisphere and should be up and running in 6 years.
The world has been largely using egg-based vaccine manufacturing. This new plant will be a cell-based vaccine manufacturing plant, so it puts Australia right at the global forefront. And because of past contracts and past investments, we've had the capacity through this pandemic to have Australian manufacturing and therefore certainty for Australians. What we're doing is providing that certainty for coming generations.
A man has been stabbed to death in Sydney's northwest. Emergency services were called to Toongabbie after the 49-year-old staggered onto the street and was heard calling for help. He collapsed and died at the scene. Police traced a trail of the man's blood back to a home on Wentworth Avenue, a short distance away.
I can confirm there were multiple stab wounds on the man's body.
I'm a nurse, so I could see that they were doing CPR, the ambulance people, and there was a lot of police walking up and down. There was about 4 ambulances, there was about 2 or 3 police cars.
Police have not revealed what weapon was used to stab the man. An army veteran who pointed an imitation machine gun at police during a tense standoff in Adelaide South will serve less than a year behind bars. 24-year-old Matthew Luke Creaster was sentenced to 2 years and 4 months jail with a non-parole period of 11 months for threatening police in 2018. He pointed a crossbow and imitation Uzi at the officers before he was eventually arrested. During an earlier court hearing, Creaster thanked police for not shooting him and apologised for his actions. A court in Sydney has heard the former in-laws of the retired NRL skipper Sam Burgess were terrified when he was allegedly threatening and abusive during an argument about his children. The 31-year-old denies a charge of intimidation after a run-in with the father of his estranged wife, Phoebe Burgess, last year. Mitch Hook told Mossvale local court Burgess repeatedly swore at him after being told his agreed visitation time at Mr Hook's home in the Southern Highlands was over. The court was shown CCTV footage of the former Rabbitoh skipper greeting fans and drinking before the visit. Burgess's estranged wife Phoebe says her father was shaken when he called her after the incident. The Northern Territory's Chief Minister has brushed off concerns from the head of his Independent Liquor Commission over new laws rushed through Parliament, making it easier for liquor licences to be approved. The changes mean the controversial Dan Murphy's development is more likely to go ahead after the government removed the need for the impact on community to be considered.
Linton Fyke has run his Nightcliff shop for more than a quarter of a century. His small liquor section is a world away from the supersized Dan Murphy's store planned for Darwin. A project that is one step closer to reality after the Northern Territory government fast-tracked decision-making, essentially bypassing the Liquor Commission in the process.
Nothing governments do surprises me. You know, they'll say one thing and do the other.
He isn't too worried about the impact a Dan Murphy's would have on his business, but thinks everyone should face the same standards when it comes to licensing in the Northern Territory.
There shouldn't be any exceptions because of your clout. It should just be that's the rules and you abide by them.
Last week, the government rushed through controversial new legislation that will see the Director of Liquor Licensing given the final say in applications without the need to consider community impact, power that had previously fallen on the Independent Liquor Commission. And Chairman Richard Coates says the new laws don't properly consider the impact on public health. Comments the Chief Minister today dismissed.
Obviously, he's welcome to his own views, but for us, this is very much about dealing with some historic issues and cutting the red tape.
The expert board of Independent Liquor Commission members last year rejected an application for Dan Murphy's based on health concerns and the proposed location of the megastore, which was to be built within 2 kilometres of 3 Indigenous communities. That site has now moved down the road here to this block, just over 1 kilometre away from the original site. 3 other liquor applications are also now in the government's hands, including 2 previously rejected bottle shops in Palmerston. The Chief Minister says while there have been regular stakeholder meetings, there was no lobbying from the liquor companies over the change in legislation. Amy Colbert, ABC News.
After 6 decades of flying, he never had a landing quite like this. Joss Botts was paragliding over Sydney's northern beaches when he crashed into cliffs. He says bystanders who rushed to his aid helped save his life. And at 91, Joss Botts says he can't wait to get back in the air.
Minor cuts and bruises, the remarkable result of a paragliding crash on Sydney's northern beaches.
Once they cleaned it and put a bandage on it, and then
they took it off, it all had come back together again nicely.
9 years shy of 100, Joss Bott's Sunday afternoon glide didn't go as planned when he couldn't find any lift.
I went down like a rock and I just hit the rock face with my feet and fell in the water.
Joss made it to a rock shelf. Bystanders came to his aid.
I felt the pull on the lines and they got me out.
Emergency services then began the precarious task of helping him up the incline.
They had 2 ropes on me to steady me. Each of these ropes could take 230 tons, they told me. A bit of overkill.
I was talking with my counterpart who was down treating the patient, and I asked how old he was, and he said 91, and I had to double check again to see that he was correct.
A lot of wind, a lot of lift, perfect day.
The experienced glider of almost 6 decades isn't planning on stopping anytime soon, once he can buy himself a new craft.
I won't have a paraglider anymore because it is completely wrecked.
Mr. Botts was discharged this afternoon. Rescuers say everyone, including the 91-year-old, are in good spirits, with the keen paraglider having escaped any serious injury. Tim Swanston, ABC News, Sydney.
Today marks 100 years since Qantas was founded. The airline was born in Queensland's outback, but 3 towns are jostling to be known as the true home of the national carrier. Ellie Grounds reports from Longreach.
The tale of 3 towns and 3 claims.
Winton was just in the right place at the right time.
They did it here in Longreach. How exciting is that?
It's our time to shine for Cloncurry.
Longreach has the Qantas Founders Museum, but Cloncurry and Winton also say it was in their towns the airline was born by Sir Hudson Fysh and Paul McGuinness.
We go with what Sir Hudson Fysh himself said, that the Qantas, as he used to call it, was conceived in Cloncurry, born in Winton and grew up in Longreach.
In 1919, Fysh and McGuinness were looking for landing strips in outback Queensland when McGuinness came across a bogged grazier. Fergus McMaster helped fund the airline.
And after getting their vehicle bogged in the sandy Cloncurry River, the inception of a national carrier was then came about.
But it was in Winton that the idea for Qantas really took flight, with the airline's first board meeting.
One of the things that they chose to do from that first meeting was, of course, move to Longreach because the railhead was down there.
A move that sparked a rivalry like no other.
And as I could say to our neighbouring towns, I guess Longreach, like Qantas, had the vision to tell the story here.
While the residents of Cloncurry, Winton and Longreach may have differing views on which town can claim to be the true home of Qantas, there is one thing they agree on. Without the vision of Western Queenslanders, the flying kangaroo may never have taken off.
It's a real Western Queensland success story.
But the airline's centenary comes at a sore point for the company, with the pandemic prompting mass redundancies. CEO Alan Joyce says flights to the US and Europe won't resume until the end of next year.
This is the worst year I think we've seen in the aviation industry in the 100 years that Qantas has been operating.
He's hoping the iconic brand survives the next 100 years. Ellie Grounds, ABC News, Longreach.
Time for the weather now with Graham Creed.
We've had some very hot conditions across the eastern states. It's pretty much